Hello and welcome back. Let's welcome in Dinesh Dua, Chairman at Pharmaceutical Export Council of India. Dinesh, thanks so much for taking out time for us. Could you just start by the news flow regarding the bulk drug parks or APIs that have been proposed? You know, earlier, before 2008, when the dependence on China was not that high, India was self-sufficient. Do you think, once again, after the issues that are happening with China, the dependence on only one or two countries or one or two players is something which the pharma industry will reconsider?
Thanks, Pankaj, first of all, on getting me on your channel. I think it's a very contemporary subject. Corona has laid bare the vulnerability that the Indian pharmaceutical sector has for the domestic market, mind you, domestic market, in terms of 90% vulnerability on the Chinese API and key starting raw materials. See, KSMs are fermentation-based, and bear one thing in mind, India was way ahead of China way back in the 70s and, early 80s. But then Chinese government collaborated big time with the private sector players and made sure that all over the world, including innovators in Europe, UK, US, they all had to shut shop and go to China. So today, all the fermentation key starting raw materials from where you make antibiotics, you make vitamins, they're all sourced from China and nowhere else. That's point one. Point two is, you see, not 2008, but by around early 2000, we were reasonably okay in API for the domestic market as well. But there again, Chinese aggression was so immense, collaborated by the Chinese government. They gave huge subsidies. When they started off the pharma parks over there and measuring unbelievable 10,000 acres or even more, they gave land free, they gave water free, they gave electricity free. Then they went to phase two of payable, if able. I mean, that's a cliche. And then they went on to start charging for the labor, for every utility and everything else, right? So today we are in a situation where all the Indian manufacturers who were making APIs or intermediates, a step prior to the APIs, are so cost uncompetitive that Chinese are able to sell their APIs and intermediates at less than the variable cost of Indian manufacturers. Just to give you a flavor, Pankaj, we export close to about $4 billion worth of APIs to regulated markets. Well, that's where Chinese cannot compete with us in terms of the regulatory landscape, in terms of India's immense capability of facing audits successfully and getting qualified. China cannot do that. So China has only one leeway left, and that is for the domestic market. The domestic market is huge. I mean, out of a total market of APIs in India of close to about $10 billion, $6 billion is domestic and $4 billion is exports. So that's the kind of stranglehold that China has on the Indian domestic market, and Corona has exposed that very, very clearly,
Right. Dinesh, I wanted to understand that, one is, of course, about, getting stuff from China or any other country. You pay a price, maybe they are a little bit cheaper and margins are higher. How important is the security part of it? Because, sometimes the drugs may just, or the API may just not be available. So how important is it at least to have 40-50% of the capacity on a captive for a very large player?
Very interesting question. You see, what's been happening is that there are similar molecules that we make for exports, which we can also do for domestic. But unfortunately, the cost competitiveness of China is so immense that we don't stand a chance, point one, right? Whereas the same API with huge amount of documentation and auditable facility is sold at maybe 60, 70% or even 100% higher than the price at which the Chinese sell in the Indian market. So, looking at all of that, and after immense struggle with government of India, I represent Ministry of Commerce and Government of India. We've now succeeded to reach out to Department of Pharmaceuticals and Ministry of Health, and Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji himself is very keenly following up on the fact that we should have self-sufficiency and no vulnerability in case of a domestic market, which is a very hefty $22 billion and growing at about 10 to 12% pre-corona and currently at about 7 to 8%. So that being said, today the government has announced three schemes, Pankaj. One is the 3 pharma parks in Telangana, in Gujarat, and in Andhra Pradesh have been sanctioned. 1,000 crores has been sanctioned to all these 3 governments to facilitate PPP, right, public and private partnership with the government, right, or with some institution per se. And then again, there are 53 APIs, Pankaj, which have been identified, for which there is absolutely no production and no imports from anywhere else except China. So if you pick on any one of those and start producing that in India, from a zero sale, if you go up to 100, let's say, you will get 20% incentive, not subsidy, incentive. So that's point one. And 8,000 crores has been earmarked for that. Another 3,000 crores has been earmarked for capital subsidies spread over 8 years. So supposing you invest 100 crores, so in the first year itself, you will get 12 crore subsidy or capital subsidy, all right? And then you become free in about 8 years' time. So 12% per year is very significant. And in addition to that, on top of that, I must appreciate Department of Pharmaceutical, Dr. P.D. Waghela, who's the secretary, and Mr. Rinma, who's the joint secretary. They made sure that because we are not self-sufficient in APIs and intermediates and KSM, if Chinese imports come in, they'll have to face heavy duties because under WTO, there's a provision under the subcaption self-sufficiency. So these 3-4 proactive measures will definitely help India in the next 10 years, one, to be self-sufficient, and two, to overtake China. It's not far away.
Mr. Dua, how cost competitive do you think India is when it comes to production of API? And also, do you think any more incentives are needed for us to be able to compete with China? I know you've already mentioned a couple of things, but do you think that there are more incentives that are needed?
Yes, Mobina, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. You see, you have to have short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies. The one that I listed out where the DOP and PMO has come forward and, given the cabinet approval, and the fine print of that is going to be coming any time for that matter, right? But, in short term, my suggestion to the ministry has been that, all these entrepreneurs and, we are the pharmacy to the world. We supply 206 countries out of 211 countries. We control 30% of the global volume trade in generics. U.S. is dependent to the extent of 40% of our formulations. Now, if we gain so much of ascendancy and stranglehold over the world, if you allow me to use the term, in terms of generic formulations, why can't we do that in API? So in order to do that, you have to reach out to the Indian pharmaceutical companies and entrepreneurs who had discontinued making these APIs because of the Chinese aggression, right? Invite them, tell them that, look, here is your capital subsidy if you restart. Here is your incentive to ensure that you kickstart it in the next 6 months. You have the technology, you fine-tune the technology through academia or through subject matter experts, and there are plenty of them in India, because India was ahead of China, mind you, in the 70s, as I said earlier. So if you can motivate these entrepreneurs, and, in Telangana, AP, if you go, 80% of the industry is dominated by these small MSME entrepreneurs who can do that. So I think catch them, incentivize them, motivate them, give them capital subsidy and the incentives, which can be worked out very easily, right? And you're there. In 6 months' time, at least you would have replaced 20 to 30% of imports from China. And gradually in 5 years' time, you can phase out China completely through a combination of, short-term, medium-term, followed by a long-term that, the government is focusing on currently.
All right. Okay, Mr. Dua, really appreciate you giving us your time here on ET Now.